So, architecture and music. We had a quite interesting discussion last week with DJ Spooky and Greg Lynn, and this week with Philip Glass and Tom Main. Now, when I first contacted both Philip and Tom and talked to them about this idea of having this discussion, we talked about a number of topics. I talked with each of them individually. Philip and I talked about this idea of what's called the music of the spheres. There it is. And this was a concept that was really developed by Pythagoras in the 5th century BC. The idea being that actually hearing certain harmonic relationships, he also found certain relationships similar in design, in form. The story goes that he was actually walking by a metalsmith shop and heard those various pitches played and realized that some were consonant, and then he went back and, as you can see here in this drawing, began to look at different ratios of what was consonant and what was dissonant, and then took that into the world of form and saw, he said, that there were also certain similar relationships in form. Now, this was not necessarily a new idea, but he seemed to have the best public relations company, and the idea has stuck with Pythagoras as being the father of this idea being that this relationship that we hear in sound that we also can see in form. This image here is of something called the monochord, which he said in a single string you can see and hear the relationships that are not only found at the microcosm level, in the level of small natural objects, but also at the macrocosm. And he made the theory that it was actually the relationships that he heard musically were also the similar relationships that were even the relationship of the planets. Subsequent theories, once we began to learn about atomic structure and atomic level, subsequent theories have also said that these relationships also hold at the atomic level. Now, the last subject that we had talked about was this idea of pattern and rhythm. And I also wanted to bring this in, this idea of trance, because I think pattern and rhythm, creating a trance, is fairly evident in a lot of contemporary music. And you can find it in places in architecture. Certainly the Labyrinth is a good example, but also any of these places where you basically have a form that you repeat, repetitive form, creating certain kinds of structures. And we end with a building by our other guest tonight, Mr. Tom Main. So, thank you very much for that short introduction. Now I would like to ask Philip Glass to come to the table and join us. I'll just read a little here. Philip holds degrees in mathematics and philosophy, and he's been playing various musical instruments since he was 6. Philip's collaborated with a variety of artists in a range of media, from opera to film to dance to theater. He's also worked with numerous other musicians, from David Bowie and Paul Simon to Ravi Shankar. He has been commissioned to write a work for the 2004 Athens Olympics for his ensemble, together with a West African kora, Australian didgeridoo, Indian sitar, Canadian fiddle, and Chinese pipa. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would consider to be the court composer of the global village, Mr. Philip Glass.
I wanted to say that I thought that Christopher presented a lot of interesting ideas in his introduction. But I should say, first of all, I'm probably not going to talk about acoustics or space in that way. Or about structure. I'm actually interested in something else. Though I think we know about structure and form, and I think Christopher gave us a very good review of that. But what I began personally to do, I began to work in collaborative mediums. And that meant dance and theater and film. say that, and we have to extend this talk a little bit, because not only do some of the ideas that I'm thinking about come from the two-dimensional art forms and not an architectural form. However, it inevitably will lead to that. I got interested when I began combining images with music at how the image would change when I changed the music, how the feeling content of the experience was completely, could be completely controlled by the music. And I was actually, to be truthful, I was very surprised by this. I had no idea that, that images could be, in a way, so neutral.
Thank you.
That,
Tom Main. In 1972, Tom Main founded Morphosis, meaning to be in formation, to develop architecture that would push the bounds of traditional forms and materials, that would counter the limiting boundaries of established design. As the director of Morphosis, Tom remains committed to the practice of architecture as a collective enterprise. Morphosis, with being winners of over 50 AIA awards and a recent recipient of the Chrysler Design Award, Morphosis and Tom state that one of their most important ideals is to resist formula solutions to unique problems, focusing on each design problem in its own context and merit. Tom Main.
And the idea of shaping the physical environment versus shaping sound, for instance, and the kind of the parallel issues of pattern, rhythm, repetition are not the formation of my work, and I can't say they are. It comes from huge numbers of kind of input. But when you look at it that way, actually new things appear, as I was looking and putting through images for this in the last couple of days. And I'm going to...
For Philip, you're asking him about making a space that essentially is not static, that is essentially performers actually change the shape of the space? Is that what you say, Philip? Well, your thoughts on the matter.
The fact that you showed dance is actually the exact place to go to for that. I discovered when I was working with dance, I was working with Lucinda Charles in 1979 on a piece of dance. First of all, she took the music and by listening to it, translated it back into new. Now here's another thing. Some of these places don't exist anymore, and we still have them. You know, that place has been destroyed.
The one we were looking at.
What? I believe so.
The one in Detroit. Did you say
Yeah.
it was in Detroit?
Yeah.
So when you were writing...
Oh, and I've also written for music for buildings that were being destroyed, by the way. It's a funny thing to do, but anyway, I did it. Anyway,
The pre-Digo we were talking about?
yeah. But you know, the thing that interests me, particularly about what you're saying, is the idea that you have to experience architecture as the body in space. It's so interesting. It's exactly what we have to do in dance, and therefore it translates immediately into time and into music.
Is the music also that kind of being able to move through space for you? I mean...
Well, as I said, space becomes a shorthand for time. Time is extremely difficult to figure out. You probably have noticed that. But onto
A column grid, in a way, is a metronome.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah. A column grid. Do you think about Tom?
Corbusier says, not in the museums, in the Corbusier.
Yeah, the open
It
plans.
represents that data
right.
which things take place.
But, you know,
Right, it's like a metronome.
That's exactly.
Yeah. Do you do that in your work? How do you think about?
Pieces of it, absolutely.
Yeah, the issue of time and procession. Do you think about that? Moving through the space?
It's a grounding mechanism. And it's to understand any type of interferences, differences, anything idiosyncratic, there has to be some basis to make that understanding. And then absolutely connected to occupation, movement, there is some basis for that. Or they're even overlapping. With the drawing I showed of the Crawford House, you could move and you could shift laterally, and there was a transition as the increments changed. But there was always some sort of a connectivity.
A point of
So
reference
shifted from
in that
one
sense?
increment to another, or these increments, of course, setting up an idea.
But this idea, I hear you talking about this idea of almost a series, a theme and variation. I mean, a series of vocabulary that is then shuffled and used in different ways throughout the space, throughout the building.
No longer singing. Oh, that's what
Yeah, yeah. But it is the idea of developing some kind of language and then letting that language spin its tail in various different ways in various different parts of the building, the environment, whatever it is. I mean, there still is this idea, like music, Philip, that there is a language that he's developing, and then he's using that language.
It's open-ended.
It's either, well, we can't decide whether it's singing or playing the drum. It's probably both. There's always been a discussion whether the first instrument was the drum or the voice. I really don't know.
On the other hand, the issue about music not having any physical form, being purely temporal, being very difficult to recreate. I mean, we have
Not
recordings,
really.
yes, but where architecture is essentially done static. It's physical, this physical issue.
The science of music notation is so exact.
Yeah.
On any page of music, there's so much information.
But don't you even think, like the point you made about dancers, and it's very difficult to have one dancer actually imitate, if that's the word.
Very hard to.
It's extremely difficult.
And the same thing is with performing, too.
And you wouldn't say the same thing about performing music?
Yes, you can. If you listen to recordings of Rachmaninoff or Gershwin playing their own music, it'll sound different from anyone else playing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Rachmaninoff particularly had. That's one thing. The other interesting thing about music, though the notation can be reproduced, it still remains not quite as much as dance, but it remains an impermanent form.
Right.
You don't even have to wrap it up and take it away.
Right.
Once you stop playing, it's gone. Architecture,
Right.
who's said sculpture is what you stumble over in the dark? What would you say architecture is?
It's what you run into and then fall down.
Yeah. But you don't stumble across music in the dark.
Right. Interesting. Yeah.
But see, if you really succeed in getting all the interactive parts working and the spectator being part of it, then you might end up with something that looks like ordinary life.
Right. Okay.
But you would have look what you have done to do that. I mean, what,
right. All that effort to get back to square one. Huh? Well, listen, I want to thank you both for being with us tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.